Oh, there we go. Good morning, everybody, and you're all most welcome. My name is Niamh King. I'm the Vice President for Programs and Strategic Content at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and it's an honor to be here doing part of our Washington work that my colleagues do so well. It's also 40 degrees warmer here, so I'm very happy to be here today. So you're all welcome. This is a new one-of-a-kind event that we're doing, Voices from the Field, as part of our 2017 Global Food Security Symposium that I hope you're all coming to tomorrow. Please note that this discussion is on the record and you can use social media. The hashtag is #GlobalAg and the Twitter handle is @GlobalAgDevelopment, and we're also live streaming, but please make sure you silence your phones. As many of you might know, for nearly a century, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs has provided an independent, nonpartisan platform for a variety of different voices to promote deeper global understanding and active U.S. engagement with the world. The views expressed by individuals on our platform are their own and do not represent institutional positions of the Council. Before we begin, let me talk about the concept a little bit, as this is new. The purpose of today's event is to bring the power of narrative to the data that we all know so well. This year's symposium will focus on the role of food security in creating a stable and prosperous world, and today's event right now offers a chance to speak to these themes in a personal way. We have a number of storytellers here that are already prepared to speak, but before I introduce them, I'd like to invite my colleague Alicia Black to join me on stage. And as many of you know, Alicia is the director of the Global Food and Ag Program at the Council, and we'll talk a little bit about the format for today.
Thank you. And I'm just going to use, this. This is where our storytellers will be standing. And I want to thank all the storytellers, actually, before we start, for being brave and trying this out with us. As Niamh mentioned, we felt that this was an important component to add. We're all very familiar with the data points about how many people in the world are chronically undernourished and are living below the poverty line. But that is separate from understanding the stories behind that or living them. And we thought that since the afternoon's focusing quite a bit on data, why not also bring narrative to the morning? So before I go into that further, I want to ask how many people in the room have ever ever heard of The Moth, the radio program? Oh, good. Okay, and how many of you have ever gone to a Moth Story Slam live event? Few people. Okay, so this event is modeled after The Moth. It's Moth-like. We did not have enough time to co-plan this with them, but maybe in a future year. But I've been to a number of them myself, and they're quite impactful because it really brings stories to life. So second poll of the morning. How many of you have had a great-grandparent or grandparent tell you about a time that they were food insecure? Yeah. How many of you had a parent tell you a story like that? And I won't ask if anybody in the room has experienced food insecurity directly, but I imagine there are some. And we feel like those stories are often what motivate people to act, and that's the case when we talk to decision makers and policymakers as well. And so we appreciate all of you coming. We know that this has a huge impact, these stories, and that they're going to be online, and there are people who will be covering them as well, and we hope that they can add a little power to the data sets that we'll be talking about the rest of the event. So, excuse me. Niamh, you're from Ireland, and we talked a little earlier about how Ireland has a unique contribution in food and nutrition security, in part because there's something in the consciousness of Ireland that makes them want to support this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. And Roger Throws here, my colleague, who can also talk a bit about it. I remember a few years back we had Bono, if anyone's heard of him, on the platform for the Food Security Symposium. And one of my colleagues came back and said, "Oh my God, I finally get it. Like, I understand why Irish people are connected to food security and famine, and why so many great organizations in Ireland kind of give back and think about things that way, because the 1840s and 1850s in Ireland was a pretty tragic time." But even so, like, I remember when we were small, we always gave some of our pocket money to babies in Biafra or babies around the world. It was just a part. It continues in our not mythology, but it continues in our history. And to this day, people are very conscious about it. But when Alicia and I were sharing stories, as she just asked about what grandparents and parents were doing, I explained to her that people find it really funny that, like, my dad grew up in the European Union. He's in his early 70s, but they grew up without electricity. They didn't have electricity in Ireland, which people find so shocking. It's the tech capital of Europe, and, you know, everyone's there, AbbVie, Intel, but we didn't have electricity till the 50s and 60s. And so that's a part of food security, I think. And your story is great from the Ozarks.
Yeah, I just want, we're not going to talk about this all day, but we wanted to start with some of the stories that were behind this. So I actually my family's from Iowa. I was born in Iowa. But my grandparents they're all farmers. And on my dad's side, my grandparents didn't start out as farmers. My grandpa was born in the Ozarks, and he got a fourth grade education. He left the mountains when he was 15 to go find a job, and a lovely German farmer taught him how to farm. And he was essentially a landless laborer in the Midwest until he ended up in southern Illinois, met my grandma, leased some land. She also only got, I believe, a 7th grade education. And by the end of his career was a very successful businessman, farmer in northern Iowa. And so I heard a lot of stories about the struggles of those early years and know how quickly things can turn around in a generation. So we are excited to hear about the stories from our group today, and that's just a little bit of some of what motivated us to create this. And thank you to our first story.
And we want to hear lots of stories. So Alicia has chimes down there that she can play very loudly. So you have 5 minutes, and then she's going to get really musical at 6 minutes. So we're looking forward to your tight, concise stories. And I'll turn it over to Alicia to introduce our first speaker. Thank you very much.
Our first speaker, our most brave speaker of the day, is Mainak Biswas. Mainak is a team coordinator at Pradhan, which is the Professional Assistance for Development Action organization based in India. Mainak, please give him a really warm welcome for being the experiment. Would you mind using the, you want to,
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Today I am going to tell a story about two people. One is a woman named Basanti Purti, who lives in a village in rural Jharkhand, a state in the tribal belt of India. The other person is myself, Mainak, but 8 years ago. I was 21 years old and just graduated from university. I am from Kolkata, a city where I went to malls, parties, played rock music, enjoyed everything a big city has to offer. But I also thought often about the vastly different experience that rural Indians faced. And when I graduated from school, I wanted to work for an organization that was helping these communities. So I joined Pradhan, uh, the staff at and who the Pradhan actually works to improve quality of life in the poorest rural villages by building agency of individual and establishing self-help groups for collective action. After living my whole life in the city of 15 millions, I moved to a place that didn't have any cell phone connectivity. I met Basanti during my first year. She lived in a village called Head Goa, and I was there discuss the possibilities of forming self-help group. But I found the villagers were scared of me. They didn't trust me. Pradhan was unknown to them, and I was an outsider. You see, Hedgoa is a tribal village that had been marginalized for thousands of years and was one of the poorest in India. Hunger was common, and women frequently sacrificed meals for their husbands and children. Nutrition was poor, uncertainty of rain, climatic hazards, and other utilization and underutilization of resources limited productivity. Education and literacy were low. But when I spoke that day, I shared the idea of forming collective to enhance food security and cash income. I talked about Pradhan's 35 years of success, helping drive social and economic transformation through improved agricultural practices, different livelihood aspects, village savings, and improves food security and nutrition. Needless to say, despite my impatient speech, I was met with skepticism. Only one villager stood up and wanted to take on this work. This is how I met Basanti. I was amazed to see her confidence. I remember she said, "Only we can change our life. Today we have a chance." She became the first leader, SHG leader in her community and mobilized others to join. They started by meeting once a week to share the problems they faced. Food was scarce, money was too tight to pay school fees. Kids got sick. Many women faced domestic violence. The list goes on. The SHG was a safe space for women to talk, to share their ideas, and to offer support to their sisters. Women started saving money, at first just 10 rupees a week, and sharing ideas for how to tackle the social problems that plagued their communities. The SHG grew and became a powerful force of change for Head Goa. Pradhan partnered with the SHG on livelihood trainings, better management of natural resources, and improved farming practices. This SHG connected farming families with government schemes to improved irrigation. Over 2 years, average income in head Goa tripled. And it was women leading the SSG, women driving economic change. Through their collective effort, they transformed their community. Women who feared me when I first spoke to the village were now proud to say they are part of Pradhan group. Diets diversified and families found they had enough food for 3 times meals a day. We achieved these outcomes not by focusing on food or technology, but on the women themselves. Their sense of agency and ability to make decisions for themselves and their families. To say this process humbled me would be an understatement. I spent 8 years living in rural communities working for Pradhan and built spiritual relations with the women uh, like Basanti Purti and their families. I often think of the courage it took for her to be the first to stand up, to raise her voice, to fight for change. Her leadership and bravery will always be an inspiration for me. Even though I might not be able to live and serve in village, I am a committed lifelong social activist and will always fight for Pradhan's vision and values. This vision is that people are epicenters of change, not products or technology. That through collective action, a community can take on any challenge, big or small, and fight for healthier and more just future. Thank you.
So there'll be an intermission, and you can come talk to Mainak about his story, and we're going to move to the next speaker. But thank you so much, appreciate it. Our next story, we're very honored to also have, a farmer from Ghana. So we are going to welcome Mercy Za. Mercy is a cocoa farmer from Ghana and a member of Kuapa Cocoa, which is a cooperative in Ghana, which also supplies Divine chocolates. If any of you have seen Divine chocolates in the store, this is Mercy's work. So thank you so much. Welcome to the stage. You can stand here or here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Besizan is my name, a cocoa farmer from Ghana, Kuapa cocoa farmer from Ghana. I'm here to introduce myself. My name is Mesizan. I'm 54 years old. I'm married with 5 children, 4 girls and a boy. I'm a Christian. I am a cocoa farmer with 90 acres of cocoa farm. I harvested 159 bags of cocoa last year. Due to my commitment, I hold 2 positions. In my village, I am a treasurer, and society level, I am women organizer. I joined Kuapa Cocoa because of how they care for their farmers. I also attend Kuapa Cocoa adult literacy classes in my village, supported by Divine Chocolates. My aim is to educate my children to the highest possible level and also to encourage more women into farming. I'm here to talk about Kuapa Cocoa. Good cocoa farmer. Kuapa Cocoa is a fair trade certified cocoa farmers cooperative organization in Ghana. Kuapa Cocoa was formed in 1993 by a group of farmers led by Nana Frimpong Abebrese II. They got assistance from Tree Training and NGO in the UK to set up this farmers-owned organization. Kuapa Cocoa started with 2,000 farmers in 22 societies, but now we have over 85,000 farmers in 1,000 societies. Kuapa Cocoa work as democratic cooperative, fairness and transparency. Kuapa Cocoa own Divine Chocolate. So we cocoa farmers, we have 44% shares in Divine Chocolate. Because of that, we also supported by fair trade fair trade premium. Because of fair trade premium, it has empowered women in our villages to touch a handiwork when cocoa is out. A handiwork like liquid soap making, tie and dye making, t-shirt printing in our village. That one also help us and our families when there is no cocoa. We also support by divine chocolate in adult literacy. That one helps me. Because of that, I am with you now in adult literacy. At first, I don't know how to read and write. I don't know how to do anything. But because of supported by Divine Chocolate, now my husband is the recorder in our village. When my husband is not in, I know how to weigh the cocoa, how to write the name of the farmer, how to record everything. So Divine Chocolate also has helped me to improve my life. Because of Divine Chocolate, I'm with you here, speaking with an important people here this morning. Thank you.
And I believe, say this on mic, I believe there might even be samples for all of you to try later. So thank you, Mercy, in advance. I know it's going to be delicious. Actually, I'll just stand here. Our next speaker is actually from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I'm going to welcome Catherine Bertini to the stage, who is a distinguished senior fellow at the Chicago Council, but you all know her from many hats that she wears. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you, Alicia. In 1996, when the Taliban took over the government of Afghanistan, those of us who were working for the World Food Program and sitting in Rome got a piece of paper sent to us by our office in Kabul that said this, the cover letters from the office said that this sheet represents the new edicts from the Taliban. And there were just 3 simple things on this sheet. Women may not go to work, girls may not go to school, and women may not leave their household without a male relative accompanying them. This posed, obviously, very great problems for the women of Afghanistan and challenges for the people working at the World Food Program and UNICEF and all the other humanitarian agencies who were destined to help to try to end hunger and to keep children in school in Afghanistan. The UNICEF executive director and I from WFP got together and said to decide what we were going to do. And the first thing we did was to inform the Taliban that we couldn't support the schools anymore because girls weren't in them. And they said, yes, but boys are important. And we agreed. But we said, unless there's a way to feed girls at school, and we don't insist they be in the same school, but unless there is that case, unless there is the case for UNICEF to provide special school supplies to the schools for girls and for boys, then we're not going to be doing it. This was part of a UN policy, essentially, that said for life-saving activities, we have to do them no matter what we think of the government, but not for developmental activities where the Declaration of Human Rights is actually more important than the government's policies. But then we said, what are we going to do about feeding women who are stuck at home? And there were brave women staff members from the World Food Program, Afghani women, who actually carried out what I'm about to describe. Because these women, who now were prohibited from working with us, set up operations at home. They would work at home. We sent them computers and generators at home so that they could work at home and bring their work periodically to the office. A couple of them were arrested, by the way, for working by stopping at the office to leave their disks. But the others went to the leadership in 7 major cities in Afghanistan. And these Afghan women said to the leadership, look, with your new programs, widows are going to die. And that's going to be on your shoulders because they cannot go out. They don't have a husband to take them out. They may not have another male relative except perhaps a young boy to take them out. They can't work. They are going to be home and they're going to die. There's no other alternative. And our proposal is that the World Food Program will provide flour, and we will provide it in each of these cities in which these women were negotiating with the leadership. And we will send that flour to bakeries that will be run by women for widows. And in each of these cities, the Taliban leadership agreed. In Kabul alone, there were 25 of these bakeries, and they were in really rundown places, but they were having women work at them. I think there was something like 850 women in Kabul alone who were working in the bakeries, making bread every day. And every day there was a lineup outside those bakeries of widows waiting for their loaves of bread. They were flat bread, almost to a Western audience. They would look like fat pizza, plain pizzas, in terms of the what they look like. But what they were was the basic sustenance that kept women and their young children alive for many, many years. These programs went on, starting in late 96, early 97. They went on until at least 2003, 2004, and you can find stories about them on the web. So today, my story is to salute incredibly brave women who could have been put in jail for working, who instead went to these all-powerful leaders and said, we have to be sure that widows don't sit home and die, and we have a solution, and that solution is getting bread to them. It worked, and let's salute those women, and let's salute the creativity of an organization like the World Food Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Wonderful. Our next speaker is Allison Kenny, who's a senior program advisor for the Program on Humanitarian Leadership at Concern Worldwide. Please welcome her to the stage.
When I was invited to participate today, I have to admit I was a bit hesitant, wondering if I had an interesting story to share. And when I thought about it, I accepted, because when I think about the subject matter today, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for the many communities who have welcomed me, and a sense of responsibility to the people that I've met, a few of whom I'll talk about today. When I was 16 years old, my father, an aircraft carrier pilot in the Navy, received orders that we were to move to Washington, D.C. for his new post. I was devastated at the time, excited for him. We were moving once again and leaving friends behind. We had been there for about 2.5 years, and it had quickly become home. It was also where I first witnessed poverty and hunger up close, and it sparked my interest in social justice issues. Soon we moved to Virginia, and I looked for a place to volunteer. It was the 1980s, and it was the height of the homelessness crisis here. Twice a week, I volunteered at So Others May Eat, a soup kitchen a stone's throw from here. I can still remember the smell of cinnamon oatmeal throughout the soup kitchen. I also remember feeling small and ashamed when I would serve seniors, not unlike my grandparents, a plate of food, and when they thanked me. It ruined me in the most wonderful way, and it set me on a path for my academic and professional career. In my early 20s, I worked in Guatemala. It was my first exposure to stunting and malnutrition, and to be honest, at that young age, it laid the foundation for my community-based development toolkit, so to speak. It also was a reminder that we are never as far away from hunger as we think we are. I met countless moms who, when they had no food for their children, boiled water for dinner. When there was no rice, no corn, no beans, just dirty water. When I came home with my many stories, my parents were so patient, listened to every word I had to say. And when I told them about my amazement of moms who had to boil water to feed their children, my mom was puzzled and looked at me and said, "Well, don't you know that's what our family did in Italy? When there was nothing to feed the children, you boiled water so that they had something in their bellies." Fast forward 10 years, and I'm sitting with Concern Worldwide's larger-than-life leader, Father Angus Finucane, and he's talking to me about keeping alive the fire in the belly, to do as much as you can, for as many as you can, for as long as you can. When I joined Concern in 2004, it was clear that this organization was committed to the fight against hunger. It's founded, as many of you know here, by a small group of people in 1968 in response to famine. Concern first responded in Biafra, then in Bangladesh, in Ethiopia, and every major food crisis over the last 50 years. I feel privileged to work at Concern. And over the years, I've witnessed numerous nutrition and agriculture development programs that have transformed lives. From looking at new approaches to the management and treatment of severe acute malnutrition, to innovative agriculture programs that are now creating stronger links between farming and nutrition, not to mention how we've demonstrated the power of women to change the world in their communities and their homes and women farmers, to the 1,000 Days movement that many of you champion for pregnant moms and children. And for me, who just celebrated with my daughter our first 1,000 days just a few months ago when she turned 2. But for me, the story that stands out the most about Concern's work and its ethos and commitment to food security is perhaps from my time in Sudan, where I visited a livelihoods program, for returnees who were coming back to their homes after the violence and the displacement. It's of particular significance for us right now as famine looms in this region and the people of the Nuba Mountains are the most forgotten. The program was a solid agriculture inputs and training program coupled with an innovative seed banking project and a microfinance project for women. It was there in Sudan in the Nuba Mountains that I met Mary. She was just a few years older than I was. She was a widow with 6 children, and she had returned to the Nuba Mountains about a year ago. I was there to monitor the program, and I asked her, how had her life changed since she returned? She looked at me, she smiled, and she said, you know, it's like when the village elder calls you into his home and he shares his knowledge and his wisdom with you so that you don't need him when he's gone. Concern was like that. They helped me build new skills. They shared their knowledge and their resources so that I don't need them when they're gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And then our final speaker of the morning, and then we're going to have a break. We might even be running ahead of schedule, which is fine, because that means that we can have more stories after the break. But our final speaker of the morning will be Ambassador Kenneth Quinn. You all probably know Ambassador Quinn. He's the president of the World Food Prize Foundation, again, amid many other titles. So welcome, Ambassador Quinn.
So, Alicia, thank you so very much. Somehow this morning, some force told me put on my green tie, so I'm glad that I fit here. I just want to say, Catherine Bertini up here telling her wonderful story. You understand why in 2003 she was chosen as World Food Prize laureate, second woman to do so. And I had an artwork done of her there in Afghanistan with those women and the role that she played. So this is a tough act to follow. In fact, everyone is. But the World Food Prize is a small organization. Morgan Day and Keegan Kautsky from my staff are here. Paul Schickler from our Council of Advisors. But 30% of the entire World Food Prize is in this room with you. So when you talk to Ivo and say, there's a talking point, well, 30% of the whole organization came. So I want to tell you, though, a story back to 1968 that you mentioned, because I had arrived in this town from Iowa, having passed a foreign service exam to become an American diplomat. So talk about, Iowans coming from Dubuque, and my dreams were nothing to do with anything any of you do. I was going to go to London. I was going to Paris. They made me go to Vienna. All right, I'd do that. But I was going to be going to fancy parties and like the Cosmos Club and drinking, sipping aperitifs and doing whatever it is that diplomats did. But middle of the Vietnam War, I was under 26, eligible for the draft, never been in the military, unmarried. And before I knew what happened, they taught me Vietnamese, and I got off a single-engine plane on a dirt road in the Mekong Delta to work in economic and agricultural development in 8 villages. So this is the same time that a few countries over in India, Pakistan, Norman Borlaug was bringing his miracle wheat. And the Green Revolution was beginning. And the same thing happened in Vietnam. The miracle rice, the IR-8 that had been developed by Hank Beechel at Erie in the Philippines, was arriving. So here I was in villages as the Green Revolution began. And at the same time, we had an AID program that we were upgrading the old French farm-to-market road that ran through all 8 villages. And it was there that I learned the lesson of my life, the lesson that changed my whole focus, and why I'm at the World Food Prize and why I'm here today. Because I observed what the combination of fixing the road and the new agricultural technology could do in terms of people's lives. So the war was a war against guerrillas, underground enemy that you couldn't see, so you couldn't bomb, boots on the ground, didn't work, and we couldn't get rid of them, and the villages were insecure. But as we fixed the road, I observed people used the IR-8 rice, and farmers would take it, encouraged by advisors, and it changed their lives dramatically, almost overnight, in just a year or two, because now you could get 2 crops a year, you could get triple or quadruple the yield, and farmers had that thing that is the source of how nutrition can be enhanced, as Roger knows, surplus income from selling part of their crop to buy other nutritious food for their children and fix their house and send them to school. And their kids stayed in school longer, girls stayed in school longer, there are opportunities for women that didn't exist before, and from this, but only as far as the road went. Now, the other thing that happened was in those villages that security got better. It undermined the Viet Cong insurgents in a way that nothing else could, that we had never been so successful. Now we could go to the villages day and night, and you could see the impact of it, and it was tangible and demonstrable. And young people had another opportunity and other opportunities, and it undercut the insurgents. But where the road hadn't been fixed, everything stayed the same. Places were insecure, houses were ramshackle, children were badly dressed. You could see that nutrition wasn't as enhanced, and security and the Viet Cong were as strong as ever. And that was the profound lesson, but it happened only by chance, by coincidence. There was no plan in the US government to do these 2 things at the same time. They were, of course, the formula that uplifted Iowa and Illinois and Indiana and Ohio and Wisconsin, uplifted America, building all those farm-to-market roads so those land-grant institutions and extensions and companies like Pioneer and Henry Wallace could get out to farmers. That's what changed America. But we've all forgotten the lesson in our country and take it for granted. That was 1968 to 70 to 74. In 1990, I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State dealing with Cambodia. There were still 25,000 Khmer Rouge the worst genocidal terrorist mass murderers of the second half of the 20th century. Vietnamese had tried to get rid of them with 200,000 troops for a decade and gave up and went home. And I had $13 million of taxpayer money, and I said, use it to go into Thailand, rent all the road grading equipment we can find, and go and fix roads out into all those areas where the Khmer Rouge are. And as we did that and brought the new agricultural technology there, it's like fighting cancer. The Khmer Rouge were the tumor, the roads were the bloodstream, and the agricultural technology was the chemotherapy. 9 years later, I got a call from the Prime Minister, said the last Khmer Rouge has surrendered, has given up, going to be tried. That was the power, the incredible power of roads, agricultural research, and technology that I learned, I saw, and how it impacted people's lives and reduced and eliminated conflict. In 2008, I had the chance to tell this story with a few others to Secretary of Defense Bob Gates and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. And I got into about halfway, and Bob Gates turned and stopped me and said, every one of my commanders in Afghanistan says the same thing. Where the road stops, the insurgency begins. And I had the chance, when I was invited to the UN in 2013 by the Director General of the UN FAO on World Food Day, to tell these stories. And I said, if you could get out the World Highway map and get the UN hunger map, put on top of it the unclassified CIA map of conflict in the world, and get the World Highway and Rural Road map, and put it on top of that, you'll see that where the road ends, poverty, malnutrition, hunger, instability, conflict, and terrorism begins. Where the road ends, they begin. So now there's a debate in this town about foreign assistance programs, right? Everyone knows what impact do they have, how do they fit with goals. So if I had a chance to talk to those who are debating the policy in the executive branch, in the Congress, I'd say, if your goal is to deal with those sources of terrorism, in the long run, there's no more effective asset that we have than doing this type of rural development using that formula that made America great. So thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Quinn. So we asked a few of you or those of you who came in, you were asked if you wanted to tell a story, and we have a few people who have submitted a request to tell a story, and I'm going to read your names now. Let's see, Wairimu Muthike. Do I see? Can you raise your hand? Hi, Wairimu. Eiji Kawamura. Eiji, where are you? Hi, Eiji. And Tom Volini. There, great. We have more slots for additional storytellers, but we're going to take a break. We're going to start with our resident storyteller, Roger Thoreau, at the top of the break. But if you three want to come see me, and if anyone else is thinking about it, come find us. Now that you've heard a few storytellers try this out, we'd love to have your stories. And we will be returning at 11:15, looking at Tria, 11:15. Great. Thank you all. Can we all give another round of applause for the storytellers in the morning?
Oh, okay, we're live. Okay, everybody, if you wouldn't mind taking your seats, please. We're going to get to, we've got to use the musical instrument. Thanks to our speakers earlier, that was fantastic. And now we're going out to the unplanned ones, which is very exciting. I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker. I've been a colleague for years, Wall Street Journal and Chicago Council and 1,000 Days, terrific. Roger Thro's going to come up and give us a story. And you have 5 minutes, Roger. Can you do that? Okay.
She's itching to use the gong, so at the 3-minute mark, she'll be making noise. Is the mic on? Yep. You didn't mention that when Bono spoke, he preluded his remarks by saying, yeah, you've told me to speak for 5 or 10 minutes, but that's a very dangerous thing to say to an Irishman, right? And to give him a stage. So he went on, and it was fine, right? So thanks for having me. Ready, Dan? What have I done to my child? Tesfaye Katema, a smallholder farmer in Ethiopia, was overcome with anguish. He was sitting on the floor of an emergency feeding tent, cradling his son, who was dying of starvation. Hargirso, his 5-year-old son, weighed just 27 pounds when he had arrived in that horrible emergency feeding tent, nestled in the arms of his father like a loaf of bread. If only. It was May 2003. I was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and I'd come to Ethiopia to cover the first famine, the first hunger crisis of the 21st century. Hargirso was just one of 14 million Ethiopians that was on the doorstep of starvation. In that olive green tent, and there were a number of them, a warren of these emergency feeding tents that had just popped up in this field. In that tent, there were dozens of children disappearing slowly, wasting away. Their moms and dads were there, and they were holding them and clutching them to the end. The World Food Program and other relief organizations were doing their best, trying mightily to save as many children as they could. I found Tesfaye sitting on the floor with Hargirso like propped up between his legs because he couldn't sit up. And he was staring into space, Tesfaye. And I asked him what had happened. Tesfaye replied to my question with a question of his own. What have I done to my child? I was stunned into silence, as difficult as that may be, believe. I mean, how do I follow up that question? It was a question that shouldn't even be asked in the 21st century. What have I done to my child? And as I stood in that tent and kind of looking at this sea of misery and suffering that was surrounding me, I realized that was indeed the wrong question. Tesfaye shouldn't have been asking, what have I done to my child? The question is, what had we done to his child? What had we done with our years of negligence of the smallholder farmers of Africa? Because the Green Revolution that Ken talked about never really made it to Africa. What had we done with our negligence of agriculture development, with our negligence of nutrition? We had marched joyfully in the 21st century, our grand new millennium, with all these technological and scientific achievements literally at our fingertips. But we had neglected, we hadn't even bothered with ending this medieval scourge, this suffering of hunger and malnutrition. Shamefully, we had brought hunger and malnutrition with us into the 21st century. So before I left that emergency feeding tent, I heard the doctors and nurses and the relief workers talking to Tesfaye and they were saying they didn't know if Hargirso was going to survive. He was starting to recover with the therapeutic feeding that they had, but they were telling him, look, the shock that he had, this hunger shock, so young in life, we don't know if he's going to make it. So as a foreign correspondent, for me, that normally would have been the end of the story. Write it up, move on to the next one. That's what we do as foreign correspondents. Move from place to place, story to story, person to person, on the move to the next story. But that story stopped me cold. That's the story I couldn't leave. And truth be told, the story wouldn't let me go. Because in the coming months and years, Tesfaye and Hargirso became the inspiration for all my reporting that would come afterwards. They became the outrage that became so central to the narrative of my writing. In those subsequent years, I often ask myself, I wonder what happened to Hargirso. Had he survived? 10 years later, in 2013, before I set off to write the next book on the first 1,000 days and the importance of nutrition so early in life for kids to get off to an early start and a good start in life, I was back in Ethiopia, back traveling with the World Food Program, in search of Tesfaye. The WFP was still working up in that area. We returned to the village, to the field where all those emergency feeding tents had been. Blessedly, they were now gone. We continued on down the dirt road, kept going. Finally, we pulled over to the side of the road beside a cluster of small, tiny, round huts, the tukels of Ethiopia. As I get out of the vehicle, I notice there's a man running across the road towards us. He was waving a machete in his hands over his head. Oh, no, I figured this can't be good. As he keeps running towards us, I recognize, oh, that's Tesfaye. Tesfaye kept running, still the machete over his head. He approaches me, and he gives me a hug. And we kind of bump shoulders, as they do in the custom of Ethiopia. Tesfaye, do you remember me? Yes, he says, I remember you. You wrote down the name of my son when he was so sick. At that moment, a little boy comes running across the road. This is Hargirso, Tesfaye said. Hargirso, he survived, hooray! But clearly he wasn't thriving. Hargirso gave me a big hug too. Hugged me around my waist. He was about 15 years old now at that time, and he only came up to the bottom of my rib cage. He was stunted, physically. But Hargirso, he had a big smile on his face. And he told me he was in school. And I said, you're in school? That's great. Can I visit? He runs off down the road, down the path to the school. Tesfaye and I follow. At the school, we find Hargirso in his classroom. First grade. 15 years old, Hargirso was just beginning to learn his alphabet. On that day, they were studying the letter B. B combination with the vowels, B by Bo, Boo. He was writing in a little notebook for the very first time in his life. He was proud that he was doing that. He was cognitively stunted. In 2003, Hargirso was one of 14 million. 10 years later, and today, he's one of four, period. 1 of 4 children in our world today is stunted in some manner, physically, cognitively, or both. It's a huge cost to all of us. For a stunted child anywhere becomes a stunted child everywhere. The ripples spread across time, space, geography. The economic cost impact us all. The clinical definition of stunting is too small for age, but that doesn't really do us justice. What stunting is, it's a life sentence of underachievement and underperformance. Yes, the monetary costs are huge. maybe totally in aggregate 2, 3, 4% of our global GDP, the impact of childhood malnutrition and stunting annually. But think of the lost opportunities. A poem not written, a gadget not invented, a horizon not explored, a cure not discovered. What might a child have achieved were he or she not stunted? A lost chance of greatness for one child becomes a lost chance for us all. So again, in our anguish, we must ask, what have we done to these children? And what are we doing to ourselves? Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And while I'm up here, I feel like I have to plug while we transition because that's a tough act to follow. Roger, for the first time, did excuse me, a podcast, and I don't know if all of you saw it, but in the lead up to this event, he interviewed.
And these three things, what I wanted. You know, you go like, dream come true, reevaluate your life. But I was like, awesome, great. And I went for it. If you have ever seen me, I am full of energy. This is contained. I had 30 minutes of awesomeness, or what I thought was awesomeness, of impacting knowledge. 40 minutes into my training, a farmer raises her hand and goes like, but what you're talking about is lack of rainfall, insufficient rainfall, weather factors. This is God's will. We can do nothing about it. So in a split second, everything I had trained them on stopped being relevant. And I was like, what has just happened? I have just spent 30, 40 minutes doing nothing. But by good graces, another farmer raised his hand. And by coincidence, he was a priest. And his only response was that, yes, God gives rain, but God also brought her to tell you about what you can do when there is no rain. And at that moment, it could be really fantastic or really awful for you. And in that, just a sentence, everything changed. Everyone became positive and they want to know more. So every subsequent training I either referred to the priest or gave some context, like at the beginning, just as a disclaimer, I know rain comes from God. We already know that. I am here not as an alternative, but to give you something more. And there was a lesson in what I learned something very important. I could be the person who has information, but I might not be the best channel to give this information. I was relatively young then, and I'm coming from the city. I'm talking to rural farmers. They do not trust me. Which topic am I talking about? Insurance. Who trusts insurance? No one. So there was just too many negative things put together. So I quickly realized or came to the conclusion that when I am recruiting trainers to train farmers, they have to be trusted within the community. The priest represented that. And even as the farmers talk about insurance, it's not that they don't have any insurance on their farm. You need to come from the point of knowledge, relate your products to them. They already diversify their farm production. That is insurance to them. They move their animals from one field or one location to the other. That is insurance to them. It is accessible, it is trusted. So when I develop products up to now, I have to be cognizant of that. I am never going to be trusted as someone talking about insurance. But if I can convince a trusted conduit and impact this knowledge to them so that it is left within the community, then I have made a bigger impact. Trust is a big thing. And you might want to be the person who's trusted, but let's face it, you're not going to be, I'm not going to be. A farmer-to-farmer extension is the most powerful tool I have found. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Tom Vallini, who is a retired Chicago businessman and board member at Grace International Carrefour, Haiti. And I have in quotes, backyard gardening for self-reliance, economic development, nutrition, and health. Thank you.
So I'll admit and warn you that I only did this because the bowl was relatively empty when I arrived. I believe in individual action. I've never been a joiner, but after the earthquake in 2010 in Haiti, I was inspired by a couple of women. One, my niece, who was running the Red Cross, Fran Marciniak Edwardson, and one by one of my younger daughters, Catherine, who was putting together packages that of toiletries and other things for people who were being flown by, I think, American Airlines to O'Hare to resettle temporarily or longer term in the Chicago area. And then I'll talk about two women in Haiti in a moment. So Fran and Catherine said, well, you know, you used to be in the building business, why don't you go do something? Well, I went down and it was just a train wreck. So I talked to the guy I found on the internet who was the oldest son of Bishop Joel June. I said, look, when the roads are clear, call me because I'd like to spend my time productively and not, you know, waiting in a traffic jam. So I went back in early 2011. We built a village. And the village is called Lambie, which is named after a certain kind of conch, actually, from the sea. You know, Haiti has really 2 or 3 different climates. It's kind of a backward sea with the bay in the middle, and then a coastal plain, and then foothills, and then mountains, subject to quite a bit of erosion because of the forestation that takes place for fuel. In any event, so we built this village, and the idea was, okay, we've got 25,000 people in this tent community, 25,000 people who showed up on the front lawn of their biggest campus. Grace is a 44-year-old Haitian religious-based organization with about 173 church affiliates, and they run orphanages and help other orphanages and things. Anyway, I sit on the board, and they're a great bunch of people, even though they're not Catholic, so I'll admit that. But we joke and have a lot of fun together. We built this village to be a model, and it was to be a model of 56 homes that were very sound, but it was also supposed to be a social model. So this Lambie community is now a very fine structural model. It passes the wind resistivity parameters for hurricanes. The roofs are designed to, you know, this film of sheet metal on the roofs above the joists just tears off in a wind, because you can always replace that, but you can't replace a wall or the roof structural member as well. But it, you know, I go back, and I usually go in the early morning because no one needs another white guy, and I observe. And what I've observed and what I've heard from my friends on the board and on the staff is that it's not a good social model at all. So we're shifting focus now to go back and do maybe something that we ought to have done in the beginning, and that's to focus on the family, focus on the family's economy and nutrition and health. They run a very good dispensary in a hospital that they built jointly with Doctors Without Borders. Just a dispensary, but you know, when I was there a couple of weeks ago, they were inoculating 400 kids, and so they do a lot with what they've got. I was also impressed by a woman in the village, and her name is Erica. And I used to buy cold pop from her because I'm a Pepsi freak. And she could buy the pop with the proceeds of the prior day's sale and sell the pop to build teams that would come thanks to the Fuller Center with whom we partnered this project. Erica's now starving to death. She's about my age. Any money she gets and any food she gets, she gives to her husband, to her daughter, and her daughter's baby. There are children in the subdivision, in the community, in the model village, who don't have underwear on. And, you know, as a dad with a lot of kids and a lot of grandkids, I like kids to wear underwear. And I like them to learn something, even if they don't want to learn it. So my time is probably getting short. Is that 1 minute warning, I hope? So since Erica was starving, I went in her backyard and she's growing a garden. I thought, okay, maybe we can do gardening. So we started a gardening program to build some self-reliance, to give people the possibility of a victory, to create for $190, basically, in a 4-meter by 4-meter backyard garden, a family can earn the equivalent of $260 to $280 US in the value of these vegetables. They can eat them, they can sell, you know, part of the production, and it really works, and it's really working out in that way. And I thought I'd learn from you folks, and that's why I'm here. Thanks a lot. I wanted to say I'm very proud to be from Chicago. I'm very proud of you guys. The last time I was a member, which was many years ago, you weren't born, it was called the Council on Foreign Relations. Yes. Now Chicago is part of the world. There you go.
Thank you so much. For our next speaker, we're going to pull up another friend of the council, A.G. Kawamura, who is sitting there as A.G. A.G. is from Solutions for the Land, but A.G. is also on our task force for this year's paper. He has also been a long-time serving member of our advisory group, and he's the former Secretary of Agriculture for California, and a farmer. A.G.
Thank you. So I'd like to tell a story about resource utility, repurposing public resources, and a story about if at first you don't succeed, always try again. So in 1985, I was farming, and still am farming, in Orange County, California. Interesting, Orange County in 1985 was still a very vibrant agricultural community. We had a lot of products still grown there. Just 30 years earlier, in 55, it was probably one of the top 10 agricultural counties in America. Fast forward then in 85, I also was a proud father, and my daughter was an infant, and I always remember that very well because I have a picture of her in a cabbage field as a Cabbage Patch infant. And we were harvesting all kinds of different things, from celery, green beans, cabbage, strawberries. In this area, there was citrus. There's a lot of agriculture, bell peppers in our area. There was a group that was in the area, and they could see driving around, and as urbanization was taking place, there was a lot of product thrown away, number 2 product. They could see driving down the rows, red with red bell peppers, pieces of fields, whether it's celery, whether it was squash, all thrown on the side. And so there was a group called the Irvine Gleaning Task Force that actually formed themselves, came knocking on the doors of the different farmers and asked if they could come into the fields and do some gleaning. Many of us had heard the stories of, there was a story of a farmer who had let people come on in his fields to glean. And of course, gleaning is that term from the Bible, that the farmer shall leave the corners of their field and allow the poor to harvest those corners so that they can feed themselves. And gleaning, out of the book of Ruth, is a very old term. And though we had heard the story of farmers letting tomato growers in their field, letting a tomato farmer letting families in their fields. And of course, the kids grabbed some tomato stakes, were sword fighting, and one kid poked the other kid's eye out, and they sued the farmer. So we were told by many friends, don't let people in your fields. That's the last thing you want to do. And so we said no to this Irvine Gleaning Task Force group. And then in '85, I remember we were harvesting a cabbage field, and as is the case these days, still the case today, if your produce doesn't look perfect and the market's a little low, the stores don't want it, and so you throw it away. You toss it aside. And so we were throwing a tremendous amount of our cabbage away because it had worm damage. Every other cabbage basically had some kind of worm damage in it. And I remember these folks that wanted to do something about hunger. I remember thinking that also that I don't want to ever grow something to throw it away. I want people to eat what I grow. And so we called them up and said, I tell you what, you can't come in the fields, but we want you to come on in and bring as many boxes and bags as you can, and we'll fill up those bags with perfectly good eating cabbage. I think that day that we did that, we must have given them over a ton of cabbage, over 2,000 pounds of cabbage that we were throwing away on a daily basis, by the way, 6 days a week. And they were really happy. They were thrilled, and we then saw that this was a wonderful relationship, and we continued to build on that relationship with this process of letting them come and fill up on our number twos. In 1987, the Good Samaritan Act passed, which was a great, important act in this country because it said if you were in the act of a charity, you have protection against liability. And we took that as a good green light to allow people to come on in the fields. And for the next decade, we started to build a wonderful project called Orange County Harvest, where we would let, on any given day, hundreds to thousands of folks from our urban area, now urbanizing every year, come on into our fields and glean the products that we were leaving behind. At one time, our project was the #1 project in our area in terms of volunteer hours, and we would have 700-800 folks show up I always remember a Mormon tabernacle showing up with first graders and sixth graders, or kindergartners and sixth graders, holding each other's hands, and they disappeared into our cornfield. And we were a little terrified that something horrible was going to happen. But all we could hear was this giggling and laughing, and they filled up a semi of beautiful sweet corn, and they were dirty and filthy, but they had a good time of their lives. But fast forward, we started to see that sending #2 products and glean products was always good to the food banks. But we also saw that sometimes we'd overload them with one product, and it was too much in some cases, and they would spend a lot of their volunteer hours trying to deal with sorting through it all. So we started to decide that we could custom grow maybe food for the food bank, and we did just that. We started to see that we'd have these volunteers show up, and we would dedicate 1 or 2 lines of product. We knew what the cost was per linear foot of that product, and we could coordinate it off, and they would be there harvesting side by side with our employees. And one of the greatest things that happened was the amount of respect that came from these volunteers from the community working side by side with a professional harvest crew, and how quickly they recognized that this was a skilled labor that they had no concept was so important. Fast forward, we started to see that this project had great benefits going on with it, and we saw that as urbanization was taking place, there was a strip of land along the railroad tracks that was designated to become a park. And we started to realize, well, why are we doing these different programs? Why don't we just custom grow food for the food bank? We can get land, we can get donated water, donated land, donated other resources, and obviously these are important components of what you need to grow things. And the cost that a city or a municipality pays to maintain a park, we heard at the time was about $10,000 an acre, which immediately made us say, wow, that's what it costs to grow a field of cabbage or something. So we basically prepared a great presentation, got in front of the city council, and we were all there with kids and everybody in tow, and we said, we have this great project. We'd like to create a little mini farm along the railroad tracks on this future park you're going to have, because who wants to have a park next to the railroad tracks? And we were all excited. We thought we had done our homework, and of course the council said, no, it's not going to be zoned for agriculture. It's zoned for a park. Sorry. And we all kind of walked away with our heads down, and a couple months later we came back. I know it's almost over. A couple of months later we came back, and we said, hey, we have a great proposal for same city council, same folks. And we said, we're going to build you an edible park. It's horticulture, not agriculture. And they said, okay. So that was 17 years ago that we did that. today we've continued that project moving forward, repurposing different kinds of properties. We're on the old El Toro Marine Base, an old abandoned military base, and we're custom growing food for the food bank at scale, about 5-6 acres, hoping to expand it to 20. We've been doing this for a long time. You can get a tremendous amount of products out of it. The volunteer hours that combine with the interest that comes out of the urban space is off the chart. And when you look around the country then, or look around the world, these underutilized properties, these underutilized spaces, we recognize that if you can ask the city or the county or the state to provide water, to provide food, to provide something where plants can grow, these are resources that can be easily given into a program. And then if you have plenty of volunteers, there's no reason why you can't create different kinds of food systems that don't replace the food system that we depend on, but augment that food supply and create a great way to get people back and plugged into the food system. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Sneha Singh, sorry if I said that incorrectly, from WAFA, which is Water, Air, Food Awards, and she's the U.S. Corporate Sponsorship Manager. There you are. Thanks. Sorry if I didn't say your name correctly.
I was not prepared for this, but I take this opportunity to talk about very incredible program which WAFA as well as the TPRF, the Prem Rawat Foundation, is doing, and that is Food for People. I'm inspired. I am a volunteer to WAFA, but I wholly feel about it and have been part of it for a long time. And today I'll tell you the story for Food for People program, which was started by the Prem Rawat Foundation. The founder was Prem Rawat, who totally feels that food for people, everyone has a right to food. And he went in the Jharkhand, I'm from Jharkhand, India, a tribal belt of India, a remote place, where he went and he started the Food for People in a remote area where not a motor vehicle was seen by people. And his program, when he started, I mean, the stories which I have heard, and I have been there, and I've seen that kids were even stealing food from rats. So that was the kind of poverty which was there, which we cannot even imagine. And in 2006, Prem Rawat was able to start this Food for People, which brought food. And it is such an innovative program that he was told by people, start a health center, start a school, start this, that. He said, no, the basic need is food, which is not there. Kids are malnutrition. Where will they go to school if they don't have food? So this Prem Rawat Foundation did this Food for People, which was a very innovative thing. That small piece of land the community was owning, they were the people who were supported by the volunteers from Prem Rawat Foundation, and they were now growing the food, comfort food, what they liked, in a nice US standard kitchen, I'll say, with everything, apron, covered head, gloves. Cleanliness was the priority. Food is grown there, whatever they eat, rice, pulses, vegetables, very clean and created by their parents now working, cooking, making the food, growing it, and then cooking in the kitchen. So they were trained how to cook properly. Cleanliness was a priority. Kids started getting the food, and this started in 2006. After 1 decade, the result is that the kids are now graduating. First year of graduation was in 2016, where kids graduated from the schools. The crime rate has gone down. Kids are healthy, so they don't need a hospital when they're healthy. It's a very good program, a model, which worked well, and then he took it to Nepal, he took it to Ghana. Many other places are in line that will be starting Food for People. You can go to tprf.org and type Food for People, and you will look for it. He sincerely believes in peace and sustainability. Peace, inner peace, everyone has to have that individual peace, not peace which is absence of war. that can be, we go do the agreements and then again it comes back. So not absence of conflict, but individual peace. So his concept, I really feel good about it. That's why I shared with you. Thank you for giving me this time.
So we have time, excuse me, thank you so much, by the way, thank you. We have time, I think, for one last story, and I had two potential storytellers. I see another hand, hi, Prasan, going up, but I had two that were interested in telling, and they wanted to see if there was time. Can I ask if either of my storytellers that had talked to me wants to? Scanning for those people. Oh, there we go. Please come on up, and I'm going to...
I have a friend who does improv, and I've always sort of envied that. So this is my version of improv.
and also ours here as we were up. So this is Deanna Cayley, and she's going to be talking to us a bit about cities and food and the connection between agriculture and cities. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Diana Cayley. I am a food security and monitoring and evaluation advisor at Crown Agents USA, which is a social enterprise firm here in Washington, D.C., a block away, actually. So this was an easy commute for me today. And so I just finished my doctoral dissertation in December last year, so that was good. Thank you. And my dissertation was on the measurement of urban food insecurity in urban slums. I'm interested in connecting all the stories and work that you all do in agriculture with what's happening in cities. There's going to be a more than doubling in urban populations between 2010 and 2050. So over the course of my professional career, I'm going to be focusing primarily on what's happening in cities. We also see the average time of displacement for displaced people in the world now. 3 decades ago, it was 4 months. Does anyone know what it is now? 17 years. Yeah, so what I'm looking at is the influence or the impact that migrant populations have in cities. What this looks like in Kampala for the last 30 years, half of the population has been composed of people that have migrated there from somewhere else. So Kampala, for my dissertation, was a great case study in sort of what a city looks like after several decades of having people sort of continually coming in, bringing ideas, resources, skills to bear to their work in urban environments. But so how do we study these problems for the purposes of mapping it over time across different cities? So I work on the measurement of food insecurity. So for my dissertation research, I compared 10 different food security measures, which are behavioral and experiential, down to diet diversity. So I went and I'm also a Norman Borlaug Fellow, so I did this, so the legacy of Norman Borlaug continues even to those of us that study urban environments. So for my dissertation research over the course of 2 years, with the help of IFPRI initially, and then with the Norman Borlaug Fellowship Program, I interviewed probably about 100 people informally. I collected 500 household surveys, and then I selected 20 people from those surveys to go interview them in depth about their food security situation to see why I had such a huge discrepancy in the rates of food insecurity across different measures. So the Food Insecurity Experience Scale, which is the FAO's new food security instrument. Has anyone heard of that? It was just launched a couple years ago by the Voices of the Hungry Project. That said about 80% of my sample was considered food insecure. The household hunger scale, which is a scale that USAID uses in extreme food security situations, said about half that, about 39% of my households were food insecure. That's a huge discrepancy, it's about double. So I tried to understand why, sort of linguistically, culturally, that was happening. And so I went into my interviews, these in-depth cognitive interviews, to understand how people understood the meaning of survey questions. And I went in with this agenda, and I wanted to learn about, how do you understand the meaning of this question? And my very first interview of those 20 in-depth interviews, I met with this woman for about 2 hours, and I talked to her about her family, and she was wearing a hijab, a headscarf, which indicated her Muslim faith. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco. So I asked her, Eid's coming up, at the end of Ramadan. Are you going to go celebrate with your family? And she said, I would love to, but my baby died a couple months ago when there was flooding. Because in Kampala, as you know, has anyone been to Kampala? It's the city of 7 hills. It's very hilly. And these low-lying areas where the slum communities tend to be flood once, twice, 3 times a year. And her baby had died in the middle of the night. And she said, I don't have enough money. I spent a couple of weeks, getting all of the sludge, which has, sewage in it, getting that out of the house, and then trying to keep my other 2 boys healthy and alive because they kept getting diarrhea, they kept getting sick. And I looked at my survey data and I realized my quantitative look at this woman's food security situation, that didn't show up as a blip on my radar if I were using only my quantitative survey data. So it made me realize what our responsibility is for all of us in this room is to take the world not as we see it only quantitatively through big data. The big data revolution is great, but it can only promise us so much. What our responsibility is to also tie it to these individual pieces of evidence that you all have. And we need to figure out a way to bring those to bear by using mixed methods research to understand what the impact is of our programs and to improve our targeting in the first place and mapping out where these problems exist and understanding better the nature of things like urban food insecurity. So this is my call to action to all of you. Thank you so much.
Great. We're at time, and thank you so much for sharing your story. And am I right that you also were a Next Gen participant with us?
Next generation fellow also.
With the Chicago Council, so wonderful. So many connections, yeah. I just want to, what a wonderful note to end on. I think we agree with you, like probably many of you in this room, that stories are really important if we're going to figure out how to move forward and continue to have action on these issues. And so we're just so deeply grateful to all of you who told stories. Thank you for being brave and experimenting with us. And as an audience member, I was definitely moved and am grateful. And for those of you who came, this is an experiment, so come find one of us if you feel like it and tell us what you thought of this and if we should do it again. And for the rest of you, we have sessions throughout the afternoon that I imagine you may be going to. We look forward to seeing you there, and just thank you again.